Good morning, class. This is Tyler Pronte coming to you today with the video lecture for Module 2, where the big topic here in Module 2 is the Civil War and some of the economic implications and issues surrounding it. All right, so you can see here, guys, on my little mini whiteboard behind me, we've got four objectives, four key ideas I want to express in this video that you should understand by the time we're done here. All right, first up, I want to just take a little bit and give a little context on what some of the major issues were in the Civil War. Who was fighting, what were they fighting about, and what happened? All right. Secondly, I want to talk about how the country at this time differed in terms of economic organization and how the northern part of the country had some significant advantages, and these advantages led to, in part, their victory in the Civil War. Third, I want to talk about some decisions. Third and fourth, I want to talk about some decisions that the South undertook that backfired in some sense and did not end up being beneficial in their effort. One of the things that the South did was try to cut themselves off from international trade, hoping to convince England and others to come to their aid, and that didn't work out. Fourth, I want to talk about inflation that took place in the Confederacy, the southern part of the country. And so there you go, our four learning goals for today. All right, let's jump in. Number one, what was happening here? First up, the Civil War, just to give you some background, some context, this was taking place between 1861 and 1865. All right. There are a lot of issues that are important here, but if we're going to boil this down to just the critical ones, right? The Civil War was fought between the northern states and the southern states. They've come to be described as the Union and the Confederacy. And the central issue that they're fighting about was slavery, where the disagreement was whether or not there should be a national law that makes slavery illegal, or instead, if this is something that should be left up to states on their own to decide whether or not they wish to have slavery as a legal practice. Okay, and so of course, as you know, the North, the Union prevailed, and the South, the Confederacy, did not. All right, lots of other issues that have been studied a whole bunch, but if I'm going to try to boil it down, I'd say that's the heart of the matter. Okay. So what led to the North coming out ahead and winning the Civil War? One contributing factor is that the North had significant economic advantage. The population was much larger in those northern states than in those southern states. And so that meant not only were there more people available to contribute directly to the military effort, but there's also more people that contribute to the economy in general. Right? So just in terms of population, the North was at an advantage. This is particularly so because even though the North had many more people than the South, right, on top of that, a large share of the Southern population were in fact slaves, who, for obvious reasons, were not going to be fighting for the Southern cause and contributing to that cause. So there's population differences that led to the North coming out ahead. Secondly, the North's economy was more industrialized. Right? You're seeing more production in cities, more factories and things of this nature, whereas in the South, you're seeing production that's more reliant upon agriculture and cotton, especially. Okay, that's important for the Civil War because much of that industrial production that you saw in the North could potentially be transformed from consumer goods to military goods. And so the economic framework in the North lent itself much more directly to helping out in the war effort than did the economic framework in the South. It wasn't just these economic advantages, though, that led to the North coming out victorious. The southern states undertook some policies and some actions that, in retrospect, seem to have harmed their cause and their efforts. As I mentioned a minute ago, the southern economy was quite dependent upon cotton. And so the South produced a lot of cotton and sold that to businesses and individuals in the North. They also exported a lot of that cotton to Europe. And so what the South then did during the Civil War was to try to limit those exports. Right? They decided that, they were of the mind that England and Europe were dependent upon Southern cotton, and if they simply withheld cotton and didn't export to Europe, then those countries would be compelled to come to the assistance of the South. Right? They would stop their stance of being neutral in the Civil War and fight on the side of the South because of cotton, their dependence upon cotton. It didn't work out that way, though. Instead, England remained neutral throughout the Civil War, and instead they ended up finding other sources for cotton. Countries like Egypt ended up producing cotton. And so, in retrospect, that's a policy that didn't work out very well for them. Fourth, the South experienced a great deal of inflation during the Civil War. Again, that just means that prices are rising and rising very quickly. Average prices are going up. So why did that happen? Well, wars, as you might guess, are extremely costly, and governments need to have some mechanism for paying for wars. So what do? There are three ways that wars can be paid for. You can increase taxes. Governments can borrow money, and they'll do this by issuing bonds. Or a third way is simply to print more money. And the strategy that was adopted to great extent in the South was number three, to print more money. And so what ended up taking place then is that the South wasn't necessarily producing many more goods and services than they were before, but there was much more money circulating around that Southern economy. And so prices increased dramatically, especially so in the final years of the Civil War. And so as we saw such high inflation, this undermined the South in the Civil War. So there you go, guys. Obviously, there are many more issues that I encourage you to read about and study about when it comes to the Civil War, but here's just a couple of ways in which the economics surrounding the Civil War can be evaluated to better understand what